They told me I was a danger to myself. That's what the court order said. But I just finished baking banana bread. I remember because the smell was still in the air when the doorbell rang, warm, nutty, with a touch of cinnamon. I had just pulled it from the oven, set it on the rack to cool, and was rinsing the mixing bowl when I saw the flash of Navy uniforms through the glass. 2 officers, a third man with a leather folder, and behind them, my niece Allison. Her mascara was already smudged. She looked like she'd been crying for hours. I opened the door with wet hands and a half smile still in my apron. It didn't occur to me to feel fear. Not yet. Ma'am, one officer said we have a court order to escort you to a temporary care facility. He said it the way someone might say they were here to fix your plumbing, courteous, firm, practiced. My first reaction was confusion, the kind that doesn't register as danger, but as disbelief. You must have the wrong house, I said, laughing just a little. I think you've made a mistake. No. Aunt Lily Allison interrupted, her voice cracking. It's not a mistake. You need help. I didn't understand the words. Not really. Not until the man with the folder, a court-appointed guardian, stepped forward and told me I was under temporary adult protective supervision due to cognitive decline and safety concerns. I still had flour on my hands. My banana bread sat cooling behind me on the stove. My house was in perfect order. The furniture polished, bills paid, garden watered. I made my bed that morning. I'd done yoga. I'd read 3 chapters of a novel and made a grocery list. And they were telling me I couldn't be trusted to live alone. Behind them, I saw my brother through the upstairs window watching. He didn't wave. He didn't come down. He just stood there, partially shadowed by the curtain. I'm not going anywhere, I said, the laugh gone from my voice. Allison stepped forward and touched my arm. Aunt Lily, please, don't fight it. It's just for a few days, just until the doctors can adjust your medication. I blinked at her. What medication? She looked away. The guardian began listing rights or the suspension of them. The phrase temporary hold for evaluation echoed like it belonged in a news story. Not my life. I refused. Of course I did. I said I wasn't sick. I said I wanted to speak to my lawyer. I asked what this was about. I raised my voice. The officers stepped inside. I took a step back. Allison began crying louder, her hands fluttering, like she wanted to stop them, but didn't. I remember thinking it looked like theater. That's when the taller officer gently but firmly took my elbow. Not roughly, not cruelly, but with the finality of someone who does this every day. I was barefoot when they led me out. I hadn't even put on my shoes. The concrete of the porch was cool. A light breeze carried the smell of my gardenias. I turned around instinctively to look at the house, the blue shutters, the climbing roses, the porch swing my husband built. And that's when the door closed. I wasn't allowed to go back in. They put me in a dark gray sedan. Not a police car, something nondescript. I wasn't handcuffed. I wasn't arrested, but I wasn't free. Allison hugged me before I got in. Her tears stained my shoulder. I'm sorry, she whispered. It's for your own good. I looked at her, then really looked, and I saw it. The absence. The way her eyes wouldn't meet mine for more than a second. The way guilt played at the edges of her mouth, but didn't reach her body. There was something hollow in her grip. And suddenly, I remembered the document she'd brought over a month ago. Refinance paperwork, she'd said. Just routine. I hadn't understood all the legal terms, but I trusted her. I'd signed it. As the car pulled away, I didn't cry. I stared out the window, trying to remember if the paper I'd signed had said anything about power of attorney. The driver turned on the radio to a soft jazz station. I sat there, hands folded, heart pounding, trying to convince myself that this wasn't real, that someone would realize the mistake and call it off. But no one did. When we arrived, the facility had flowers out front. A woman named Deirdre greeted me with a clipboard and a forced smile. She called it residential support, said it was like a hotel with nurses. I looked around the lobby, beige walls, vinyl chairs, a TV bolted to the ceiling. They took my purse, then my phone. I remember standing in that intake room, lit by a flickering fluorescent panel, and feeling my knees shake. "I'm not crazy," I said. Deirdre nodded like she'd heard it 100 times. "I know." But she didn't know. No one did. The first night, I didn't sleep. I lay on top of the thin mattress, my shoes still on, staring at the ceiling, while the hallway light flickered through the gap under the door. Every sound, the distant squeak of a cart, the cough from the next room, the click of a nurse's heels, echoed like a hammer in a hollow skull. I kept trying to replay the day like it was a movie I could stop and rewind, searching for the moment where things went wrong. But I already knew when it had started. Not today, not even last week. It started the day I said yes to everything. I said yes to helping Allison with college tuition after her mother died. Yes to letting my brother move in when his second marriage ended and the drinking got worse. Yes to postponing my retirement when the school begged me to stay on one more year. Yes to caring for my mother through the late stages of her dementia, even when she forgot who I was and screamed that I was stealing from her. And when she passed, I stayed in the house, alone, familiar, quiet. But I didn't mind the solitude. I liked the way sunlight stretched across the wood floors in the afternoon, how the kettle sang like a memory, how I could still hear my husband's voice when I walked into the garage. He built that house with his hands. He laid the stone path. He planted every azalea. He measured each room so I'd have the best view of the garden from the kitchen sink. After he passed, I made it mine. I added shelves for books, painted the walls in colors that reminded me of his eyes started painting again slowly at first, then compulsively. Nature scenes, trees split open by light, quiet blue ponds with something just beneath the surface. Allison used to come by all the time. She'd bring groceries, stay for dinner, curl up on the couch with her legs tucked under her like a child again. We'd watch old movies. She loved Bette Davis. She'd call me her second mother. She'd say, "You saved me," and I believed her. She started calling less when she got her first job. I understood. Then she met someone, a man I never liked, but kept my opinions to myself. When they got engaged, I hosted the shower, cooked everything from scratch, even made little place cards with each guest's name in calligraphy. That was the last party I held in that house. After that, her visits turned into requests. Could I lend her some money for a down payment? Could I co-sign a line of credit? Could I watch their dog for the weekend? Could I write a letter to the board saying she'd been a full-time caretaker for me, just to help with some licensing requirement? I didn't question it. I said yes, because love in my world meant never hesitating when your family needed you. But slowly, things started shifting. My brother Michael, who'd finally sobered up, began making strange comments about the value of the property, how it didn't make sense for an older woman to live alone in a place with 4 bedrooms. He joked about how one day I'd forget the house even existed. He said it with a laugh, but there was something cold behind it, something calculating. I told myself I was imagining things. I'd been alone too long. Maybe I was too sensitive. I baked more. I volunteered at the library. I called friends I hadn't seen in years. I tried to pretend that nothing was changing. But then came the day Allison showed up with a man in a suit. She said he was helping her sort out some of her financial chaos, and that he'd offered to take a look at my paperwork too. Streamline things, make sure my estate was protected. He used words like liquidity and title flexibility and living trust. I smiled and nodded. He handed me a pen. I signed. I didn't ask questions. I didn't want to look foolish in front of Allison. I didn't want her to think I was slipping. I told myself I could always review it later, ask a friend to take a look, but I never did. The same week, I noticed she had keys I hadn't given her. She said she'd made a copy months ago in case of emergencies, but she let herself in when I was still in my robe. She didn't apologize. I started hiding things. My banking folder, my ID, even my phone. Something felt off, and I couldn't quite name it, but I knew enough to hold back, to wait to observe. Then came the night I fell. It was small, nothing dramatic. I slipped on a rug by the sink while reaching for a sponge. My hip took the brunt of it. I didn't break anything, but I was sore. I called Allison to let her know, just in case. I said it like that, just in case. The next morning, there was a nurse at my door, a visiting health professional, she called herself, said Allison had asked her to check in. She was polite, took my blood pressure, made me squeeze her fingers. Then she asked questions that felt rehearsed. What year is it? Do you remember who the president is? Have you felt disoriented recently? I laughed and played along, gave all the right answers, but I noticed she wrote something down every time I hesitated, even for a second. When she left, I called Allison. She didn't pick up. I called again. Still nothing. 3 days later, the banana bread was in the oven, and the doorbell rang. They took my shoelaces the first night, said it was standard procedure. They also locked the windows, replaced my earrings with plastic studs, and logged my toothbrush in a file. I wasn't in a hospital, not quite. It was a memory care facility tucked behind a shopping center surrounded by tall hedges and silence. From the outside, it looked like a boutique retirement villa. Inside, it was all restraint and routines. Each room was painted the same pale yellow. Each hallway had a photo of a forest or a waterfall or a field. Nature scenes meant to calm. Everything smelled like lemon disinfectant. The TV in the day room was always on, but never watched. I saw people in wheelchairs, people mumbling to themselves, people with eyes glazed over like polished stones. I didn't belong there, but no one cared. I wasn't allowed a phone call for 3 days. I asked for Allison. I asked for Michael. I asked for my lawyer, David, who'd handled my taxes for 20 years and once helped me negotiate a mortgage refinance with my late husband. They told me those contacts are currently restricted under the temporary hold. I asked for the whole documentation. They handed me a stapled packet of medical forms and court orders, the language dense, the signatures digital. There was a psychiatrist on staff. He met with me on day 4. Young, sharp-suited, too polished. He wore a watch that cost more than my car. He asked me questions in a warm voice, the kind therapists use in TV dramas. asked about my memory, my orientation, how often I got confused. I told him I taught literature for 30 years. I told him I could still recite Yeats by heart. I told him what year it was, who the president was, the birth dates of every person in my family. I told him what the nurse had looked like the day she arrived, the way her left sleeve was stained with what looked like coffee, the chipped nail polish, the faint accent. He smiled politely and nodded. When he left the room, I saw him hand my file to a woman in scrubs, whisper something, and glance in my direction. That was when I stopped trusting anything. I began cataloging everything: the names of staff, the time of meals, the medications they tried to give me. I didn't swallow the pills. I held them under my tongue, spat them out into tissues, flushed them when I could. Some were vitamins, some weren't. A week passed, then another. Allison never came. Michael never called. The staff began to treat me like I wasn't there, like I'd been worn smooth by time, just another old woman stuck between past and present. I started to hear how they spoke about us when they thought we were asleep. "She keeps asking for a lawyer," I heard one of them say. "It's kind of sad." "Let her," the other said. "Won't make a difference. Family signed the guardianship. She's not getting out unless a judge overturns it." Guardianship. That was the word. The first time it fully registered. I waited until I had a chance to go outside. We were allowed in the garden for 15 minutes each day, escorted in small groups. There were benches and small planters and a white gravel path. I picked up a twig from the ground and tucked it into my sock. Back in my room, I used it to open the edge of the vent beneath the sink. It came loose easier than I expected. I started hiding things there, scraps of paper, anything I could write on. I wrote letters to David, to the state bar, to the medical board. I wrote down everything I remembered from the day Allison brought the man in the suit, the notary's name, the date on the form, what I'd been wearing. The mind, when it's cornered, becomes precise. One of the aides was kind, a woman named Thea, maybe in her 50s, soft voice, older than the others. She'd once worked in a nursing home in New Jersey. She'd lost her mother to the same kind of guardianship scam and had only learned too late. I saw something flicker in her when I told her my story. She didn't say anything for a long time, but a few nights later, she slipped me a real pen, said nothing, just left it in the drawer. That pen felt like power. I waited another week. I knew I'd only get one shot. When the facility hosted a community craft day, letting residents make watercolor paintings to support cognitive stimulation, I folded one of my letters into the back of the canvas board, addressed to David. I wrote his full name. I wrote "confidential" in capital letters. When the volunteer came to collect our art, I smiled and said I hoped someone would actually open mine. I don't know what happened after that. I didn't hear anything for nearly 2 weeks. And then one morning, they called me to the front office. A lawyer was waiting. Not David, someone I'd never seen. A younger woman in a navy dress, tight curls pulled back into a bun. She said she was a probate attorney, said she'd received a package with my letter, said David had passed away 3 months ago. I almost collapsed right there. She showed me a copy of the guardianship filing. My brother and Allison had filed it jointly, claimed I was a risk to myself, that I'd nearly burned down the kitchen and failed to recognize family members and had paranoid delusions. None of it was true. The date of the kitchen incident, that was the night I lit a candle and forgot to blow it out. The flame never touched anything. As for not recognizing them, I'd had the flu. I hadn't opened the door because I was asleep on the couch. They had created a narrative, and I had signed documents that helped them do it. I asked her if it could be reversed. She said maybe. If I could prove capacity in court, if I could get a judge willing to review the records, if I could get someone to testify that the diagnosis was false. I was quiet for a long time. Then I said, when it took 6 weeks to get a hearing, 6 weeks of sterile meals, locked windows, group reminiscence therapy, and pretending to swallow pills I knew I didn't need. I wrote everything down, every memory I could verify, every phone call I remembered making, every item in the house that had been mine for decades. I drew a map of the rooms, listing the exact color of the walls, the placement of photographs, the way the front step creaked on the left side, because my husband had laid the stone unevenly on purpose, said it would remind me of him every time I walked in. The young attorney, her name was Marin, brought me books to help reestablish my legal capacity, vocabulary tests, logic puzzles, simple but necessary things. I devoured them like kindling for a cold mind. She said if I could pass a forensic psychiatric evaluation, a real one, by someone unaffiliated with the facility, it would support a motion to terminate the guardianship. I took the test on a Wednesday. A man named Dr. Tillman came in, older, unshaven, wore a tweed blazer that smelled like pipe tobacco and rain. He didn't treat me like a child. He didn't smile too much. He asked difficult questions and let me answer in silence. He read one of my letters, said nothing. Then he said, "You were a teacher." I nodded. English, he guessed. Literature. He tapped his pen once. "You still read." I smiled, almost laughed. "That's like asking if I still breathe." He passed me a printed page, a passage from Faulkner, told me to interpret it. I didn't even hesitate. By the end of the session, he looked tired, or maybe impressed, or maybe both. He said he'd seen dozens of cases like mine in the last 10 years. Elder fraud through guardianship. Most weren't this organized. Most were gone before they even realized what was happening. You held on, he said. That's rare. Marin filed the motion 2 days later. Allison contested it immediately. Her reply to the court was 12 pages long, signed by a different attorney than before someone expensive. They submitted old medical notes, emails I supposedly wrote transcripts of calls I never made. They claimed I'd given Allison full power of attorney in 2023 and had expressed repeated fears that I couldn't live alone, that I had asked to be placed somewhere safe, that I had thanked her for taking responsibility when I wasn't strong enough anymore. They attached photographs of the kitchen candle melted wax near a paper towel and cited it as evidence of declining executive function. It was all perfectly shaped, a narrative sanded down to sound reasonable, concerned, humane, but it was false, every word. The day of the hearing was cold. Marin brought me a dark gray coat and a pair of leather shoes that pinched at the heel, but made me feel somehow human again. I hadn't worn real clothes in almost 2 months. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized myself. My hair had thinned at the temples. My cheeks were hollow, but my eyes, they were mine. The courtroom was small, no gallery, just a few chairs. Allison sat at one table, her attorney beside her. She wore a navy dress and pearls. She looked like a woman accepting an award for community service. She didn't look at me. Michael wasn't there. Marin whispered, That was a good thing. The judge, a man named Carson, asked a few preliminary questions, reviewed the filings, read out the motion title like it was just another formality. Then he asked if I had anything to say. I stood. My hands didn't shake. My knees didn't falter. I felt my husband's ghost behind me, just a breath, the way he'd always stood beside me at school functions, PTA meetings, town halls. I cleared my throat, and I spoke. I didn't beg. I didn't cry. I began with the day I met Allison's mother, how I was 14, and she'd been a baby in a yellow blanket, how I carried her in my arms while my mother worked double shifts, how when she died, I took Allison in and raised her as my own. I told the judge how I taught seniors Hamlet and Faulkner and Baldwin for 3 decades, how I still wrote lesson plans in my sleep. I recited the passage from Yeats I used to keep on the fridge. I gave him birthdays, Allison's, my brother's, my mother's. I told him what color each room in my house was. I described the exact layout of the kitchen, the box of recipe cards, the chipped teacup on the second shelf that I kept because it reminded me of my grandmother's hands. I told him the date of the fall, the date of the nurse's visit, the make and model of the notary's car. I ended by asking him a question. Would you give away your house if you still remembered every memory inside it? The courtroom was quiet. Judge Carson sat back, pressed his fingers together, looked from me to Allison and back again. Allison shifted in her seat. Marin said nothing. She didn't have to. The judge didn't rule that day. He said he needed to review everything. He said he took the matter seriously. That guardianship, once established, carried heavy legal weight, but so did dignity. We left in silence. Outside in the parking lot, I saw Allison talking to her lawyer. Her eyes met mine for just a second. I thought I saw something, not regret, not remorse, but maybe unease, like someone whose lie had been cracked but not yet shattered. I didn't speak. I just got into the car, and for the first time in months, I closed the door on my own terms. The call came 10 days later. I was sitting in the lounge at the facility, pretending to read the same page of a magazine for the 3rd time. I hadn't painted in weeks. Something in me had gone still, not broken, not dulled, just quiet, like a held breath. The waiting was its own kind of imprisonment. Every knock on the door, every shift in routine made my heart stutter. But this time, it was Marin. Her voice didn't rise, didn't shake. She simply said, "It's done." The judge had ruled in my favor. The guardianship was terminated. My legal rights restored. I was no longer under supervision. I could leave. I didn't cry. I thought I would, but I didn't. The moment felt too wide for tears, like standing on a cliff and realizing you're still alive after the wind tried to take you. All I said was, "Thank you." She came to get me that afternoon, brought me clothes again, not the ones I came in with. Those had been misplaced. So she gave me her own coat, a soft black pea coat, and a pair of jeans that were too long but warm. I walked out of that building without looking back. The nurses tried not to meet my eyes. We drove in silence for a while. Then Marin said, "The deed's been transferred." I turned toward her. She didn't explain. She didn't need to. My house was gone. During the guardianship, Allison and Michael had sold it, transferred the deed through a series of legal maneuvers Marin called gray, but not black. It had been listed as an asset under their control, and the sale had already gone through. A couple from Illinois had bought it, paid cash. I asked nothing else. There was nothing to ask. The house was no longer mine. The swing my husband built the rose trellis, the stone path we laid barefoot in summer, it belonged to strangers now. Maren drove me to a small apartment she'd found through a friend. Short-term lease, by the sea. 1 bedroom, high windows, quiet. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the air change. It smelled like paint and salt and possibility. There were no memories here, no ghosts, just space. She gave me the keys and a file folder. Inside, court documents, her business card, a check from the small emergency trust David had set up years ago, and a letter. I knew the handwriting. It was from David, dated 3 weeks before he died. He must have known something. He always had an instinct for when things were turning. The letter was short. Lily, if you're reading this, then the wolves got too close. You're smarter than all of them, and stronger than most people realize. I've moved some funds into a secured account you can access any time. It's not much, but it's yours. No one can touch it. Keep breathing. Keep fighting. They don't know who they're dealing with. I sat down on the bed, held the paper like it was the last warm hand I'd ever feel. Maren stayed just long enough to make sure I had food, water, a phone. She gave me her personal number. I asked her why she'd help me. She said her grandmother had lost her mind at the end, but not before her son stole her retirement and left her in a trailer park. I couldn't save her, she said. Maybe I could save you. I slept for 13 hours that night. When I woke, it was raining. The kind of rain that falls soft but steady, like the sky is trying to apologize for something it can't fix. I made tea. I opened the windows, and for the first time in weeks, I moved through a space that was mine. In the days that followed, I began reclaiming my mind, inch by inch. I bought paints again. I started walking by the shoreline each morning. I let the wind pull at my coat and didn't fight it. I watched the way the gulls turned with the current, how they didn't seem to need a plan. They just trusted the air to carry them. Allison emailed once, a single line. I hope you're okay. I didn't reply. What would I say? I'm okay. I'm breathing. You lied about my mind so you could sell the only place that ever held my life. No, let silence be my answer. Michael never reached out. I heard through a neighbor, one of the few who still dared to call, that he was drinking again, living in a condo 2 towns over. Someone else's ex-wife had thrown him out. I didn't care. That part of my life was ash, cold and final. A week later, I walked past my old house. I did it without meaning, to the way you find yourself on a road you didn't plan to take. The shutters were painted white now. The gardenia bush was gone. The porch swing, his swing, had been removed. A car sat in the driveway. A child's toy on the lawn. Someone else lived there. Someone who didn't know the echoes still lived in the walls. I stood across the street for maybe 3 minutes. Then I turned around and walked home. It's strange how quickly people forget your name once you no longer have anything they want. After the court ruled in my favor and the guardianship was overturned, Allison vanished. The same woman who used to call me every weekend, who used to send me photos of her dinner plates and handwritten birthday cards that called me Aunt Second Mom, disappeared like she'd never existed. No apology, no explanation, not even a defense, just silence. Michael, when he finally did reach out, left a voicemail. It was short, slurred. Lily, things got complicated. I was just trying to Help, I didn't mean everything. I didn't mean for it to go that far. He didn't say my name right. Didn't ask if I was safe. Didn't mention the house. I deleted the message without listening to the rest. Maureen told me I had grounds for a civil suit fraud, elder abuse, emotional distress. We could sue them both. Go after what little remained from the sale. Maybe claw back a piece of the estate. But I said no. I didn't want the money. I wanted the severance. When someone shows you how little they believe in your voice, the only revenge is speaking it louder, somewhere they can't touch. So I painted. Every morning, I got up before the sun and opened the window wide, even when the air was cold. I painted until my back ached and my fingers stiffened. I painted oceans that cracked open into thunder trees, bent with invisible weight windows, with hands pressed on the other side. One day, a gallery in town agreed to display 3 of them. They called the collection After Silence. People asked what inspired them. I never gave them the full answer. What would I say? That my family wrote me off like a sick pet, that they had doctors label me broken because I refused to be convenient, that the strongest betrayal isn't a stranger's cruelty, it's the quiet collusion of the people who once kissed your forehead. No, some things don't need to be said out loud. I found rituals instead. I made my tea at the same time, each day loose leaf, steeped exactly 4 minutes. I learned to cook new things. I made a Sunday routine of walking to the market, even if I didn't need anything. I met a woman there once. Her name was Joy. She wore scarves with wild colors and always brought a notebook. We talked about books, then paintings, then silence. I never told her the whole story, but she told me she used to be a nurse, said she left when she couldn't stand watching patients get warehoused like furniture. I looked at her and said, me too. We laughed, but it wasn't funny. Sometimes I still dreamed of the house. I'd be in the kitchen measuring flour only to realize halfway through that none of the cabinets opened. Or I'd walk down the hall and see photos on the walls, but all the faces were blank. In the dreams, I was always looking for something I couldn't name. A paper, a ring, a voice. I'd wake up breathless and sit in the dark until I remembered I'm here, I'm out, I'm still me. The worst part wasn't losing the house. It was the slow erosion of being believed. The moment someone looks at you and sees a problem to be managed instead of a person with a memory, with a history, with fire behind the eyes. It's the way they speak, slower, softer, like grief, even though you're still speaking clearly. They don't take you from the world all at once. They shrink you first, quietly, gently, like turning down the volume until you forget your own sound. That's what they tried to do to me. But I remembered. I remembered the exact weight of my name. And when the time came, I said it loud enough for a judge to hear it. I still had a small sum from David's account, enough to live carefully, enough to rent the little seaside flat and buy groceries and paint. I didn't need more. I'd once believed that home was a structure, 4 walls, a roof, familiar light across the floor. But now I knew home is what you salvage when the walls collapse. Home is the voice you reclaim when they try to speak for you. One evening near dusk, I walked past a park where 2 girls were playing. One fell, skinned her knee. The other bent to help her gently, wiping the dirt away with the edge of her sweater. They were maybe 9 or 10, sisters probably. It hit me sharp and sudden that Allison used to look at me that way, like I was the person who could fix anything, like I was safety. I almost turned away, but instead I watched. I let the ache come and go, the way waves do not to drown, but to remind you that you're still part of something that moves. And then I kept walking, toward the sea, toward the wind, toward whatever came next. I started writing again, not for anyone else, just for myself. At first, it was just sentences, lines that floated in my head as I walked by the water, phrases I couldn't hold inside any longer. I'd jot them down on the back of receipts, grocery lists, anything I could find. You are not the thing they said you were. She is not confused. She is mourning. They changed the locks, but not the story. Eventually, I bought a proper notebook, black cover unlined pages. I kept it next to the kettle. Each morning before tea, I'd write a single page. Not stories, not poetry. Not yet. Just memories. Shards. The way the floorboards creaked at night. The way my husband tap his spoon twice before sipping. The exact way my mother looked the first time she forgot my name. Some memories came out brittle, others warm, some sliced as they surfaced. But I wrote them all. There's something sacred about putting words down in your own hand after someone's tried to take that hand from you. It's a reclamation, not of time, but of authorship. They thought they could rewrite my life in legalese and court filings, but they couldn't erase the original manuscript, not while I still breathed. One afternoon, I was on my usual walk when I saw an elderly woman struggling to get up from a bench. Her bag had fallen to the ground, and her wrist looked swollen. I rushed over, helped her sit, and asked if she was okay. She was wary at first. I saw it in her eyes, that flinch, that fear of being seen as weak. I knew it well. I crouched beside her and said softly, "Don't worry. I'm not here to fix you, just to stand beside you until you're ready." She blinked. Then she nodded. Sometimes that's all anyone needs. I sat with her for 20 minutes until her daughter arrived. When they left, the woman turned and said, "You must have been through something." I smiled. We all have. I started volunteering at the local library after that, just a few hours a week. I ran a writing group for women over 60. Most of them came for the cookies, but some stayed for the stories. We called it Loose Ends. Every week we'd pick a theme. First love's final goodbyes, secrets never told. They'd laugh, cry, argue about commas. Some of them hadn't written since high school. One day, one of the women, Evelyn, with a sharp tongue and a beautiful limp, said, "Lily, you should teach again. You've got that way about you." I didn't answer right away, because part of me had stopped believing I was still allowed to lead anything. But she wasn't the first to say it. Joy, the woman from the market, had started coming by my apartment. She brought figs and hard cheese and wine that didn't taste like vinegar. She liked to sit on the floor, lean her head back against the wall, and ask impossible questions like, "Do you believe in fate?" Or, "If your house had never existed, who would you be?" One night, I told her everything, the whole story, no summaries, no euphemisms. When I finished, she didn't gasp. She didn't pity me. She just said, "They mistook your silence for surrender, but you were only gathering force." I didn't know what to say. No one had ever said it quite like that. I wrote that line down the next morning. They mistook your silence for surrender. I painted it into a canvas, dark background, slashes of white like wings. Later that week, Joy told me she knew someone at a small press. said they were looking for essays from older women, real stories, nothing polished, nothing perfect, just truth. I told her I wasn't ready. She said, "You're not supposed to be." I sent them 3 pages from my notebook about the banana bread, about the knock at the door, about the cold tile under my feet as I stood there trying to understand. They wrote back a week later, said they wanted more. It wasn't a book deal. It wasn't fame. It was acknowledgement, proof that my words still mattered. And maybe that was enough. I didn't write to be heard by the world. I wrote because I had been silenced, because the narrative they wrote for me didn't match the one carved inside my bones, because truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper that refuses to die. One of the women in my writing group asked me, "Would you ever go back to them?" I knew what she meant. Michael, Allison, the family that turned on me. I paused, then said, "I'm not angry anymore, but I'm not returning either. Some roads you don't walk again, not because they're blocked, but because you've outgrown them. Forgiveness is not the same as forgetting." I forgave them in my way. I let the rage bleed out like old ink. I didn't need to scream. I just needed to walk in the opposite direction. They'll tell their own version of the story. They'll say I was confused, that I was rescued, that they did what they had to do. And maybe someone will believe them. But I won't, because I was there, and I remember. I got a letter from Allison. It arrived on a Tuesday, handwritten, postmarked from another state. The envelope was soft pink, the kind you might use for a birthday card, but there was no return address. Inside was a single page. "Aunt Lily," it began, "I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted to say, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you the way I did. I thought I was protecting you. I see now I was protecting myself. No explanation, no details, no offer to make things right. Just guilt, quiet, folded neatly in cursive." I stared at the paper for a long time. I ran my fingers over the loops in her handwriting loops I'd taught her to shape when she was 7 years old, her tiny fingers holding the pencil too tight. I remembered the little girl who used to sleep on my shoulder, who called me when she had nightmares, who used to say, "I hope I grow up like you." And I felt nothing, not hate, not sorrow, just the quiet absence of something that once was. I didn't write back, because some things are better left unanswered. I tore the letter in half, not out of spite, but out of finality, a small private ritual. Then I stood at the window and let the wind carry the pieces down the street. That evening, I pulled out the box where I'd been keeping everything: court, documents, notes, old photographs, emails. I laid them out across the floor, one by one, my handwriting, their signatures, the glossy real estate brochure with my house in full sunlight, staged with a couch I didn't recognize. And then I burned them, outside in a metal pail I used for weeds. The pages curled fast, blackened, then folded in on themselves like defeated wings. I stood with a bucket of sand beside me just in case, but the fire stayed, contained. It was the only funeral I needed. After that, I made a decision. No more stories about them, only stories about me. I applied for a part-time job at the art co-op down the street. Nothing fancy, just managing the front desk, organizing community events, helping with inventory. They hired me on the spot, said they needed someone who could stay calm when things got chaotic. I smiled and said, "I've had practice." The days grew longer. Spring bled into early summer. The breeze softened. My steps grew lighter. One morning, I found a box on my doorstep. No name, no note, just a package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, one of the teacups from my old kitchen, chipped on the handle, my grandmother china. I knew that crack. I'd traced it with my thumb 100 times. I held it in both hands, stunned. How it got there, I'll never know. Maybe someone found it during the resale. Maybe they felt something when they held it, a ghost, a weight, a whisper. Maybe Joy did something she didn't tell me. She had her ways. I placed it on the windowsill where the morning sun could find it. That's all I did. No tears, no phone calls, just gratitude. Because somehow, against all odds, a piece of my history had returned not to haunt me, but to say, you still exist, and you are not erased. One of the girls in my writing group, a retired nurse named Dina, asked if I'd ever consider telling my story to a wider audience. A memoir, maybe, or a podcast. I said no at first. It felt too raw, too complicated. But that night, I dreamed of the house again. This time, it wasn't falling apart. It wasn't empty. It wasn't even mine. But I stood in the doorway, watching another woman, a stranger, baking something at the stove. She turned, smiled, and offered me a piece. And in the dream, I took it, sat down at the kitchen table, ate in silence. And for the first time, I didn't wake in panic. I woke in peace. Maybe it was time, not to reclaim the house that was gone, but to reclaim the story, not for revenge, not even for justice, just for clarity. Because when someone tries to make you disappear, the boldest act is to write yourself back into existence. So I sat at my kitchen table with that chipped teacup beside me and a blank page in front of me, and I began again, not at the betrayal, not at the fall, but at the first act of choice, the first time I said no, the first time I refused to be recast, the first time I looked in the mirror and said, "You're still here." And that's where the real story begins. I began walking a new road, not down by the sea, but through the old part of town where nothing seemed to change. Cracked sidewalks, ivy-covered fences, the faded red bench in front of the barber shop that had been there since I was a teenager. I walked it each morning with a thermos of tea notebook under my arm, not for the exercise, but for the rhythm. The familiarity of passing the same trees, the same brick walls, gave me something to press my breath against. It's a strange thing being seen again, not just looked at, truly seen. The man at the bookstore remembered my name. The woman at the bakery gave me a second croissant once, just because. There was a boy, maybe 10, who waved to me every time I passed the mural on Main Street. I never found out his name, but I waved back each time like we were old friends. After months of silence, of suspicion, of being observed, like a problem waiting to resurface, these small acknowledgments felt like oxygen. I didn't talk about what happened unless someone asked directly. And even then, I gave them only pieces. There was a guardianship dispute, family stuff. It got resolved. It wasn't shame that held me back. It was precision. I wanted my story told on my terms, not devoured by the idle mouths of town gossip. One day, Joy came over with a microphone. She said, "You're going to record it. Not for the world, for yourself." I protested. She smiled, set the mic down on my desk, and left. It took me a week to touch it. When I did, it felt heavier than it looked. I sat at the desk, turned off all the lights except the one lamp, and pressed the button. And I spoke. I told the story again, beginning not with the banana bread or the knock, but with the silence before it, the meals alone, the whispers in the hallway, the first time I saw the absence in Allison's eyes, that terrifying void where love used to be. I spoke for 2 hours without stopping. When I finished, I didn't save it. I didn't need to. It was the telling that mattered. That night, I slept deeper than I had in years. The next day, I opened the notebook again. This time, not to write down memories, but to shape them, to turn them into something alive. I started a short story about a woman who wakes up in a stranger's house, only to realize it's a replica of her own, built from memory, perfect in every detail, but somehow still wrong. I didn't name her Lily. I didn't name her anything, but I gave her my breath. I submitted it to a local literary journal under a pen name. They accepted it, called it Hauntingly Restrained. I laughed when I read that. They had no idea how much I'd held back. Marin called to check in every few weeks. She never pried, never asked if I wanted to sue or to speak to reporters or to join advocacy groups. She knew my answer before the words ever reached her mouth. No, I'd say, and she'd say, good. She told me that quietly there were others, other women, other men who'd faced what I had. Some were still stuck in it. Some hadn't made it out. Some didn't even know what had happened to them until it was too late. Your story helps us, she said once, even if it never leaves this room. I thanked her, then changed the subject, because I couldn't carry everyone else's weight. Not yet, but I could carry my own. One late afternoon, I walked down to the sea just as the sun was starting to bleed into the horizon. The sky was layered blue over violet streaks of gold like torn silk. The waves were slow, deliberate, heavy with evening. I stood there, hands in my pockets, letting the cold salt air sting my cheeks, and I thought about what was taken, my home, my sense of safety, my trust, but also what was returned, my voice, my clarity, my name, not because someone gave them back, because I reached into the fire and pulled them out myself. No court ruling can restore your soul. No apology can rewind time. You learn to live in the aftermath, not as a victim, but as a witness, and then if you're lucky, as a narrator. I started signing my paintings again, at first with just initials, then fully, L.E. Moore. It felt bold, almost arrogant, but then I thought, why not? They tried to erase me with paper and silence. Let me answer with color and sound. One day, Joy asked me if I hated them. I didn't answer right away. Hate is a sharp, easy word. It feels good to say, but it keeps you tethered to the thing that broke you. I don't think I hate them, I said finally, but I don't forgive them either. Joy nodded. That's fair. Some things are beyond the reach of forgiveness, not because they're unforgivable, but because the person you'd be forgiving no longer exists. Allison wasn't the girl I raised anymore. Michael wasn't the brother who helped me scatter my husband's ashes. They were different now, hollowed out by fear, greed, maybe desperation. I don't know. I stopped trying to explain it. What matters is that I didn't become like them. I didn't fold. I didn't vanish. I'm still here, and I still remember. The letter from the journal arrived in a cream envelope, heavy, almost ceremonial. They wanted to feature my story in a special issue, a printed edition, not just digital. They were doing a series on truth, they said. Stories that were once silenced. Stories that had to claw their way back. I read the email version twice before I let myself open the envelope. Inside was the same message, only warmer somehow. Ink on paper, a signature at the bottom. They were even offering a small honorarium. It wasn't much, but it wasn't about the money. It was about the proof. Proof that I'd written something from the ashes. Proof that something in me still spoke loudly enough to be heard. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not the women at the writing group. Not Joy. Not Marin. It felt private, like a secret garden I wasn't ready to share yet. I placed the envelope in the drawer beside my bed. Each night, I'd open it just for a moment to remind myself they didn't win. Sometimes, I walk past the legal office where Allison's attorney works. It's on the other side of town, near a cafe that makes terrible coffee but excellent scones. I go for the scones. I see the nameplate on the office door. It doesn't make me flinch anymore because they saw me once as a liability, a case to be managed, a file to be organized into compliance. But they missed the most dangerous part of me, I remember. Not just what happened, not just the betrayal. I remember who I was before it, and I rebuilt her from the ground up. One morning I received a second letter, this one from a woman in Arizona. She'd read the online version of my story and wanted to say thank you. Her daughter had been trying to declare her unfit. She said, "I thought I was going crazy, but your words reminded me I'm not." I sat with that letter for an hour. I didn't cry. I wrote her back. "Don't let them define you," I said. "Speak, even if your voice shakes, even if no one listens at first. Keep speaking until someone does." I've written 20 letters since then, all from women mostly, a few men, all older, all stunned into silence by the people who claimed to love them. They don't want justice. They don't want court battles. They want to be believed. It's such a simple thing, belief. But once it's stripped from you, it takes everything with it. Every week, I light a candle for those women. Not a ritual of mourning, a ritual of return, of coming back to themselves, of taking up space again. I still dream about the house, but the dreams have changed. Sometimes I walk through the halls and everything is just as it was. The photographs, the floral curtains, the soft creak of the floor outside the bathroom. But there are no shadows, no fear, just me, moving from room to room, turning on every light. One morning I painted that dream, a hallway with every door cracked open, light spilling out, no people, just space. I called it proof of presence. It sold within 2 days. The woman who bought it sent me a note. She said, "I don't know why, but I feel like this painting understands me." And that's the thing, isn't it? We think we're alone in these betrayals. We think our pain is singular, isolated, a fluke. But it's not. There are thousands, maybe millions of us walking around with invisible bruises, with names no longer spoken at family gatherings, with stories that people would rather not hear because they complicate the narrative. Well, let them be complicated. Let the truth be a mess. Let it burn. I don't want to be a saint. I don't need to be a symbol. I just want to be real. And that means telling the story again and again until the echo becomes a chorus. Joy told me once, the best kind of revenge is becoming someone they have no control over. I think she's right. Because now, when I pass a mirror, I don't see the woman who was taken from her home. I don't see the woman declared unfit. I see the one who survived it, who named it, who refused to vanish, who rebuilt a life not from comfort, but from clarity. They lied about my mind, but they couldn't take it. They forged my signature, but they couldn't rewrite me. They sold my house, but they never owned my story. That's mine, and now it's in print. I walked past the courthouse last week. It was a clear morning. The sun was angled just enough to cast long shadows across the steps, the kind that make everything feel like a film reel from a life you once lived. I didn't plan to go there. I was meeting Joy for lunch at a cafe nearby, but I felt a pull as I passed, something quiet, magnetic. So I stopped. I stood across the street just far enough to see the front doors without stepping onto the steps. I remembered the weight of those doors, how cold the brass handle felt in my palm that day. I remembered the click of the judge's pen, the hush that followed my words, the sound of my own voice, filling that sterile space like something wild, untamed, undeniable. I hadn't come to relive it. I'd come to honor it. That room didn't save me, but it bore witness. And sometimes when your story has been buried under the opinions of others for so long, all you need is a room that listens. I stood there for a few minutes, not moving, not blinking. Then I whispered just under my breath, "Thank you," not to the building, to myself. I turned and walked on. Joy was already at the cafe, her scarf wrapped 3 times around her neck, even though it was 70 degrees. She waved when she saw me, then pointed to the sky like she was trying to remind me the world was still beautiful. We talked about small things. Her niece was pregnant. The shop next to the library had finally reopened. Someone was playing live cello in the square that weekend. For a moment, it felt like nothing had ever been broken. Then she looked at me, more serious. "You're different now." I nodded. "Good different." She smiled. "Strong different." And I felt it then, not like pride, not like power. Something quieter, something more settled. I felt my center. For a long time, I hadn't known where it was. I had let other people tell me who I was, where I should live, how much of myself I was still allowed to claim. I had shrunk to fit their comfort. I had signed papers I didn't understand because I wanted to be easy. I had ignored the knot in my gut when the doorbell rang because love had once worn the same face as betrayal, but not anymore. Now I lived in my own home, not the house I lost, but the space I chose. I wrote my own story, not the one they drafted for a judge, but the one that rose like steam from my own breath. I said no without apology. I said yes with intention. And I didn't ask anyone for permission. Joy reached across the table and touched my hand. "You should celebrate," she said. "Celebrate what?" She shrugged. "Survival." That night, I opened a bottle of wine, a good one, the kind I used to save for holidays. I lit a candle, played my husband's favorite jazz record, sat by the open window, and listened to the sounds of my neighborhood laughter silverware, a dog barking the low hum of someone's late-night TV. And I wrote, not about the betrayal, not about Allison, not about Michael. I wrote about the first painting I ever sold. The nervous joy, the way the buyer touched the canvas like it was something holy. The moment I realized that what came from my hands could be loved by a stranger. I wrote about strength, not in the way people define it, not loud, not towering, but the kind that survives being disbelieved and still insists, I know who I am. I wrote until the candle went out, until the bottle was empty, until the fear was gone. Later that week, I got a call from a journalist. She'd heard about my story through the journal that published my essay. She wanted to interview me for a piece on elder rights, guardianship, abuse, legal reforms. I almost said no, but then I remembered the woman in Arizona and the letters I'd received and the one I'd written back. I told the journalist yes, but I want to tell it my way. She agreed. She asked if I'd be comfortable speaking on camera. I paused, then said, "Yes, I have nothing to hide." She asked what I wanted people to take away from the story. I said that sometimes the most dangerous thing a woman can do is remember out loud. The day the interview aired, I didn't watch it. I couldn't. Not because I was afraid. I wasn't anymore. But because I didn't need to see myself from the outside. I'd already lived it bone deep. Every pause, every silence, every moment I held my breath while they tried to erase me, I remembered it all. I didn't need a screen to prove I existed. But the world saw it. The emails began almost immediately. Some from old students who said things like, "You always were the strongest person in the room," or, "I remember how you made me believe my voice mattered." Some from strangers, women who'd never told anyone about what happened to them. One from a man whose daughter had used a similar guardianship tactic to silence his protests when she sold his land. One from a nurse who said, "I've seen this too many times, but I've never heard anyone say it out loud like you did." And then there was one from Allison, shorter than before. Just a few words. I watched it. "You told the truth." "I didn't. I'm sorry." That was it. No return address. No apology wrapped in excuses this time. Just a confession, quiet and naked. I read it once, then folded it and placed it in the back of my notebook, the same black one that had carried my first sentences out of the dark. Not to forgive, not to reopen, anything. Just to remember that even shadows retreat when you shine a steady light. Joy came over the next night with a bottle of Prosecco and 2 ridiculous paper crowns. We wore them while we watched the sun go down like children at the tail end of a long birthday party. She raised her glass and said, "To freedom." I laughed. "To survival." We clinked glasses. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You took a story meant to bury you and turned it into a door." She was right, because the interview wasn't the end. It was an opening. The local college reached out to ask if I'd consider teaching a community class. Just a few sessions. Creative writing for women over 50. I said yes, not because I needed to teach again, but because I wanted to listen, to bear witness to the quiet power of women who've lived and lost and lived again. My first session, 6 women showed up, nervous, clutching spiral notebooks. None of them had written anything since school, but their eyes sparkled, like they knew they'd been holding something for years that finally had a place to land. I opened the class by saying, "We're not here to be perfect. We're here to be real, to speak what we were once told to swallow." And then I told them my story, all of it. No Polish, no filter, just truth. When I finished, no one clapped. They didn't need to. One woman wiped her eyes. Another reached out and touched my arm. I saw myself in every one of them, not as I had been alone, cornered, doubted, but as I am now, undefeated. Not because I wasn't broken, but because I made a mosaic out of the pieces. There's something extraordinary about living long enough to speak your own eulogy and then wake up the next morning with breath in your lungs and a pen in your hand. That's what survival is. Not the absence of pain, but the reclamation of your own language, of your own definition, of your name. So here I am, not bitter, not vengeful, just here, alive, writing, and more myself than I've ever been. Some treasures had been recovered. Others, more valuable, still had been discovered for the first time. It wasn't the ending I'd expected. It was better, harder, clearer, more honest. It was mine. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe. And feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.